So, you want to hear the story of Rolex? Come a little closer. This isn't a story most people know, not the real one anyway. Some people are born into privilege. Others are forged by loss. Hans Wilsdorf lost both parents by age 12. His mother died when he was young. His father followed just a few years later. Orphaned, alone, sent away to boarding school in Bavaria with almost nothing. Those dark years shaped him, hardened him, made him hungry to prove himself, to build something that would last, to matter in a world that had taken everything from him. By age 24, that orphan boy arrived in London with limited English, little money, and a vision that everyone would call impossible. London, 1905, a gray, rainy city. Hans Wilsdorf, 24 years old, walked through those Victorian streets with a briefcase and an impossible dream: wristwatches for gentlemen. His suit was clean but cheap. His English was broken. His confidence was built on nothing but determination. He approached London's established jewelers, one after another, day after day. The pitch never changed. Quality Swiss wristwatches for the British market. The response was always the same: laughter, dismissal, sometimes outright mockery. Wristwatches? Those feminine trinkets? Those toys for ladies and children? Young man, serious gentlemen wear pocket watches. Always have, always will. This is tradition. This is England. Week after week, doors slammed in his face, sometimes literally, sometimes just with cold words. Standing on those rain-soaked streets, rejected again and again, Hans could have quit, should have quit by any reasonable measure. But each rejection only proved to him how blind they all were, how spectacularly right he was going to be, and how sweet vindication would taste. But Hans found one person who believed: Alfred Davis, his brother-in-law. In a cramped London office lit by a single gas lamp, surrounded by rejected loan applications and mounting bills, the two men faced an impossible choice. Alfred voiced his doubts. They'd been rejected by every investor. Every bank in London had turned them down. Perhaps the world was right. Perhaps they should quit while they could. Hans stood, pacing that tiny room with restless energy. He had seen the future: Swiss movements, proper cases, the right marketing. This wasn't a fad. This was the future of timekeeping. They would start small, build their reputation one watch at a time. But in 20 years, the name they built together would be known worldwide. Alfred studied Hans's face in the lamplight, saw something beyond youthful optimism, saw unshakable certainty. They shook hands across that cramped desk, partners. In that moment, lit by a single sputtering gas lamp, Wilsdorf and Davis was born. Founded on borrowed money, a workshop barely larger than a closet, and a dream that refused to die. Hans traveled to Switzerland, to the watchmaking heartland. In a traditional workshop overlooking the Alps, an elderly Swiss watchmaker examined the tiny movements Hans proposed. The old man was skeptical. Wristwatches that small had never kept proper time. The wrist moves constantly. Temperature changes. Motion disrupts the balance. But studying Hans's face, the watchmaker saw something rare: true obsession, true dedication. He gave Hans an introduction to Egler, a manufacturer in Bienne. They were innovative, experimental, perhaps crazy enough to help a determined young man chase an impossible dream. That introduction changed everything. 2 years later, 1908, Hans sat in a London carriage on a rainy day, notebook on his lap. For months, he'd been searching for the perfect name. It had to be short, 5 letters maximum, easy to pronounce in any language, memorable, strong, symmetrical on a watch dial. He tried dozens of combinations. None felt right. Then, according to his own account, it came to him. He wrote 5 letters, stared at them, and knew, instantly, Rolex. 5 letters, easy to say in English, German, French, Spanish, any tongue, perfectly balanced on a dial, strong, authoritative, unmistakable. In that moment, a legend was born. Then came the Great War, the war that changed everything, including how men told time. In the trenches of World War I, soldiers discovered that pocket watches weren't just impractical, they were deadly. Fumbling through muddy pockets for a watch while under enemy fire cost precious seconds. And in warfare, seconds cost lives. The wristwatch transformed overnight, from a feminine accessory to an essential military survival tool. Soldiers needed instant access to time for coordinating attacks, timing artillery strikes, synchronizing movements. Rolex was perfectly positioned to supply military demand. Orders flooded in. But the war years brought challenges beyond business. Hans's partnership with Alfred Davis ended in 1915. Personal losses would follow in the decades ahead. Through it all, Hans focused on what he could control, creating watches that would endure. By 1926, Hans had developed a revolutionary innovation, the Oyster case, the world's first waterproof wristwatch, a screw-down crown, screw-down caseback, sealed crystal. 3 revolutionary seals, working in perfect harmony. In a Swiss laboratory, they submerged the watch. 1 hour, 3 hours, 5 hours, 8 hours, still running perfectly. Laboratory tests proved the concept, but Hans knew the world needed something more dramatic, undeniable proof that would capture the public's imagination. He needed a story the world would never forget. October 7, 1927. Mercedes Gleitz, a 27-year-old British secretary and champion swimmer, became the first British woman to swim across the English Channel. But just days later, another swimmer falsely claimed to have completed the same feat faster. Though the rival quickly admitted the claim was false, doubt had been cast. Mercedes agreed to defend her honor with a second swim. October 21, 1927. The English Channel coast. Gray morning, storm clouds threatening, rough waves crashing violently on shore. The water was brutally cold, much colder than her first successful crossing just 2 weeks earlier. Hans Wilsdorf approached Mercedes on the beach, carrying a small leather box containing a Rolex Oyster watch. This second swim, this vindication swim, would serve 2 purposes: prove Mercedes's achievement was genuine, and prove to the world that the Rolex Oyster could survive the impossible. Mercedes placed the watch on a chain around her neck and walked into those brutal waves without hesitation. For over 10 hours, Mercedes Gleitz battled the cold, unforgiving waters of the English Channel. 10 hours of relentless salt water crashing over her. 10 hours of brutal cold that would destroy any ordinary watch. Everything Hans had built, his reputation, his company, his life's work, would either be vindicated or destroyed in those 10 hours. Though Mercedes was eventually forced to abandon the swim due to the extreme cold and deteriorating conditions, she had spent more than 10 hours in the freezing channel waters. When she finally emerged, wrapped in blankets, shivering violently, exhausted, Hans asked to see the watch. With trembling hands, Mercedes removed the chain from her neck and handed it to him. Hans brought the watch slowly to his ear. Rolex Oyster had proven itself under the most brutal conditions imaginable. The next day, Hans took out a full-page advertisement in the Daily Mail. The headline read simply, "The Wonder Watch That Defies the Elements." The world took notice. Orders flooded in. The impossible had become an undeniable reality. Throughout the 1930s and 40s, Rolex became the watch of those who pushed human limits. In 1931, Hans introduced the perpetual movement, a self-winding mechanism powered by the wearer's natural motion. A rotor that spun with every movement of the wrist, winding the watch automatically, eternal, unstoppable. In 1953, when Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay became the first humans to summit Mount Everest, they wore Rolex. When Jacques Cousteau dove to ocean depths never reached before, he wore the Submariner. When test pilots broke the sound barrier, they wore Rolex. The brand conquered the highest peaks, the deepest seas, the fastest speeds. Every extreme of human achievement wore the crown. The crown logo became one of the most recognized symbols on Earth. Hans Wilsdorf died later that year, on July 6, 1960. Before his death, he had established the Hans Wilsdorf Foundation, ensuring the company would remain independent forever, never subject to the pressures of markets or shareholders. He left behind a legacy worn on millions of wrists worldwide, a crown that represents excellence, and proof that one orphan, with nothing but unbreakable will, could change the world forever. The Rolex crown endures, as does the will of the man who forged it. That was the true story of Rolex, the orphan everyone rejected, the dreamer they called mad, the man who proved them all wrong. But Hans Wilsdorf isn't the only legend with an untold story. Subscribe to discover the next untold story, the next impossible dream. This is Timeless Tales.